Okay, so cooldowns are a concept that pretty much everyone who would call themselves a gamer would understand. Most commonly associated in games like MMOs, RPGs, or MOBAs, this is how most everyone is introduced to the idea. We'll call these traditional cooldowns for the sake of clarity. When it comes to fighting games, the first games that might come to mind are games like Granblue or Rising Thunder for those of you who are caught up on your FGC lore. These games function like your traditional fighter, but also introduces the idea of traditional cooldowns on your specials, locking the player out of special moves for a period of time after using them in the same way that you'd recognize from other genres. But some of you may be surprised when I mention that pretty much every game utilizes cooldowns in some abstract way. Many games lock you out of an action after performing one, with the only difference being that the cooldown bar is just invisible or portrayed in a different way. For the sake of this video, we'll be calling these non-traditional cooldowns. It might seem silly to view games through this perspective, but regardless, it begs the question, why do cooldowns exist? Cooldowns, for the most part, allow players to access a portion of a character's power budget while also preventing their game plan from being too simplistic. If you were playing a platformer and you didn't have to wait until you touched the ground again to jump, then a lot of the obstacles in level design would just become trivial. But if you had a game where you only ran forward, the game just wouldn't feel nearly as fun. Sometimes, cooldowns give players access to intentionally overpowered tools, but lock it behind a long cooldown period after use. This can let the player feel very strong in the instance where they use the move and give them a satisfying rush when used correctly. However, the extended downtime forces players to put more thought into when it's most optimal to use, since they will always be weaker without it. On the flip side though, some cooldowns are just long enough to prevent you from spamming it literally every frame. These typically always give the player something to do, but usually don't provide the same level of effectiveness or power that longer cooldowns would. For a good example of traditional cooldowns, let's take a look at League of Legends. Whoa, wait, please don't click off, I promise, it'll be quick. Most champions' base kit gives them access to 4 abilities, each with their own cooldowns, as well as a sneaky 5th cooldown that we'll talk about in a bit. The most impactful cooldown that a champion can have is their ultimate ability. Most champs don't even have access to this move until they've reached level 6. And once you do, the cooldown on this move is usually massive in comparison to your other abilities. But the impact that a character's ultimate ability can provide can be game-changing. It's more than likely that your ability to score takedowns or win team fights can be solely dependent on your ultimate usage. On the other hand though, when your ultimate is on cooldown, you lose a lot of your fighting power. And opponents who know you don't have access to it can take advantage of this. Even more so if they have their own ultimate available. In stark contrast to ultimates though is auto attacks. This one was the 5th sneaky cooldown I was talking about before. You can pretty much access auto attack at any time, but the pretty much is doing a lot of legwork in that statement. Sure, auto attacks don't have their own little meter like abilities do, but it's not like you're attacking on literally every tick of the server, no matter how fast you click. Unless you're a specific class of character, the speed in which you auto attack will never outclass the abilities. Auto attacks give the player something impactful enough to do while they wait for their more impactful cooldowns to come back up, and keep the player engaged even when they've done all their flashy abilities. Because of the nature of auto attacks, I'd call them non-traditional cooldowns. For more examples of non-traditional cooldowns, let's take a look at the fighting game of all fighting games, Street Fighter. While you're never gonna have to wait over a minute to use a move that you've already used, it follows the same principle that your strong buttons lock you out of actions longer than your weak buttons. In my last video essay, I touched on just how important spacing was in the core gameplay of Street Fighter. To sum it up, you want to stay at a range where you can hit your opponents, but far enough away where you can move out of the way of your opponent's attacks. Because of that, your strongest moves are usually the ones that have the most range. To compensate, these stronger moves have a comparatively longer cooldown period where you're not just locked out of the move, but locked out of doing anything after using it. This isn't just tied to your big normals either. Special moves are an extreme example of this. Special moves usually have more power than your normals through a variety of properties such as range, invincibility, or being an additional way to open up your opponent. But with higher power comes a higher cooldown period, leaving you more susceptible to counterplay. In the same way that people can take advantage of you throwing out your ultimate recklessly in League, people can also take advantage of you recklessly throwing out your biggest buttons or specials in Street Fighter. When it comes to light normals though, they don't exactly function the same way auto attacks do in League. They provide a lower risk, but a lower range, and by extension, a lower power method of controlling the space in front of you. You're not going to get jumped on for whiffing a light normal the same way you would for whiffing a heavy normal or a special move, but if someone presses a heavy button or a special move when you throw out a light, chances are that they'll just outrange you and beat out your button. But with that out of the way, that brings us all the way around to Multiversus. Multiversus is unique in the sense that it uses both traditional cooldowns like League of Legends, but also non-traditional cooldowns like Street Fighter. Sure, it's not the first fighter to implement this style, and it most certainly won't be the last, but incorporating this system into fighting games requires a unique set of design decisions and implications that come along with it. For example, I'd like to take a look at my main, Jason. Jason is a good example of a character who's designed around those non-traditional cooldowns we talked about. He is a slow but powerful tank of a character who struggles to approach but has exceptional range to compensate for this. This longer range means that Jason has an inherent advantage over his opponents, as it's much easier to stay in an effective range where Jason's attack will land but his opponent's will not. But similar to Street Fighter, this range advantage often comes with a longer period of time where Jason is unable to act upon missing the attack. He needs to be extra considerate with the timing and positioning of his attacks, or else he'll be very susceptible to getting whiff punished. This can lead to a bit of an awkward tango for Jason, where he not only needs to be close enough for his moves to land, but close enough to be 100% sure that people just can't walk out of his range and whiff punish him. If he tries to overcompensate, this can lead to his walk forward getting stuffed out. But if he's trying to space around the tip of his hitboxes too much, then it's less certain that his move will actually land by the time it comes out. While this alone makes Jason a pretty precise character to pilot, he's offered a little bit more wiggle room through the use of his singular traditional cooldown. Through his rage mechanic, Jason becomes immune to knockback and gains a substantial power buff on his next attack at the cost of some health. He only loses access to this buff after throwing out an attack, taking a set amount of damage, or being hit by a move that would break armor. This move alone can remove the counterplay of stuffing out Jason's approach with most characters, as even the moves that are able to deal with Jason's rage are specifically designed to be lower in range, most of the time. However, the downside that the buff would be removed after he throws out an attack means that he not only needs to be considerate about when he uses the cooldown, but also considerate of what move he throws out after he has the buff, since you don't want to eat the damage cost for nothing, especially since his buff is crucial to how he deals with a lot of the cast. Characters that are faster than him or have more range are very difficult for Jason to deal with using only his base kit. Once he pops rage though, oh, they're in Jason's world now. I could go on and on about how this design decision allows Jason to live out his power fantasy of being the slow yet persistent horror villain who eventually corners his victims and tears them to shreds, but I'd be here all day. In summary, Jason is a character who takes full advantage of non-traditional cooldowns for his balanced decisions, but is allowed to experience his power fantasy through the use of his traditional cooldown. Let's take a look at the other end of the spectrum though, and talk about characters who are balanced more around their traditional cooldowns. A character like this that I'm sure most of you watching are familiar with is Bugs Bunny. And anyone who's played against a good Bugs knows that this move is a bitch. It's a hurt box that Bugs can either place himself or set up to be placed shortly after he uses it on the ground. While it's down, Bugs or his teammate can hit the safe into a direction to function as a high damage, high kill power projectile. And when I say a direction, what I really mean is any direction, including bouncing it off the ground with Dare to create a huge, insanely active hitbox on top of Bugs, making it very difficult to approach him. He can also hit it with Jab to have it slowly move forward so Bugs can approach with it and start setting up some devastating combos. It had to get nerfed a ton over the course of the game's release because safe was just so ungodly oppressive. If you weren't literally taking 600 damage from double bug safe, you were taking 100 and maybe losing your stock off of getting hit with just one bug safe. It's much more tame now at the time of writing, and honestly I could see them buffing the move back up, but the fact that this move is still a core identity of the character hasn't changed. While safe is out, Bugs has a chokehold on the game's pace until he sends it flying off screen, Bugs breaks it, or you find the perfect opening to break it before it becomes a problem. When safe isn't available though, Bugs is actually quite lacking in the normals department. Nair is a great combo starter, but its higher up hitbox makes it easy to challenge from below and prone to low profiles. He can instant air dash it, but it has less effective range than trying to dodge jump in with it. His up air is a war crime, but you're not exactly incentivized to approach with the move. Outside of those though, the rest of his normals are pretty lackluster. They're all either slow, lacking in range, or easy enough to whiff punish. Funnily enough though, Bugs' preferred way to play when his safe is on cooldown is to stall with his other traditional cooldowns. Bugs has a ton of mobility when his down special's on the field, making him really difficult to catch and easy for him to stall. Players are even more decentivized from challenging him if he takes that perk that empowers his down special with a hitbox. His side and up special also allow him to stall for a decent amount of time, as it's a large, slow-moving hitbox that most characters don't really want to challenge directly. It's especially important to note that in Bugs' case, that once the opponent is aware that he doesn't have access to his cooldowns, they can take advantage of it. Of course, when safe is on cooldown, many characters can just beat out or position around Bugs' moves easier than they would against other characters. But even when Rocket is on cooldown, Bugs loses access to a very important tool for recovery since his up and side special without Rocket are slow and hardly move him anywhere. It's clear to see that Multiversus has done a ton to ensure that characters have game plans that are structured around the implication of their cooldowns. The implementation of traditional cooldowns allow characters to experience a unique degree of power fantasy that non-traditional cooldowns can struggle to balance. But then again, that begs the question, at what point is a move so strong that it requires a traditional cooldown? Multiversus is no stranger to giving characters traditional cooldowns or taking them away should the situation call for it. Back in the beta, if you could believe it, Superman's eye lasers started off as a non-traditional cooldown. It was clear though that after the first few months that players weren't just gravitating towards the move, but abusing it relentlessly to tack on damage and keep their opponents in disadvantage with little to no risk. The same thing also ended up happening with Wonder Woman in the full release with her lasso. Hey there, Editor RPS here. Because this video ended up taking a little bit longer than I thought it would, while I was working on the video, they ended up removing the cooldown on Wonder Woman's lasso again. This just goes to show that developers can use cooldowns in order to balance the game in the direction that they see fit. Now, I personally don't agree with this decision, and I'm about to list off a few reasons why I think that's the case. But I just wanted to pop in and clarify that, yes, I know, it's not a cooldown anymore. Oh, also, while I'm here, subscribe to the channel. Anyways, back to the video. These changes had to happen because the moves completely changed the design direction of the character. These characters were designed to be great at close range scrambles, but had to overcome the challenge of getting into position for these close range scrambles to compensate. Since the moves that helped them answer these situations weren't on cooldown, they no longer had to subject themselves to the risk of approaching. And since they no longer had to subject themselves to the risk of approaching, they legit just wouldn't. They'd just stand or fly at a range where they couldn't get punished and keep fishing for their safe combo starter. Now that these moves are on cooldown, they give Superman and Wonder Woman an option to handle one of their biggest weaknesses without removing the weakness completely. These are good examples of when cooldowns can be added to a character to shift them into the character's intended design direction. It's something that's important to consider when we're talking about allowing characters to experience their power fantasy by providing them intentionally strong options to cover up their weaknesses. But Player First has also shown that they're willing to make adjustments for general balance as well. Looking back at Bugs, his pies have gone through a lot of changes throughout the lifespan of Multiversus. Initially, it was a non-traditional cooldown that was a slow-moving projectile that Bugs could attack to alter the angle of. If the opponent was hit with the pies would induce a slow, making it even more difficult to catch Bugs if he was stalling for his cooldowns. It even heals allies it passes through pretty well. Over time, it was found that Bugs could effectively control the screen and run away a bit too well with Pie, essentially being a mini safe that helped him stall for big safe. This led to Pies getting a cooldown, so he couldn't control the screen or run away as effectively while he was waiting on his more impactful cooldowns. In the full release though, Pies are back to being a non-traditional cooldown again, but at the cost of being unable to slow enemies on hit like they used to. We can see in the Bugs example that Player First can adjust any number of factors to rein in a move's power, and that cooldowns are just one of many balance choices to keep some moves in check. But what if players find a way to navigate around the limitations of cooldowns? What happens if two players on a team pick the same character? Ordinarily in games like Smash, picking double of any single character is perfectly legal because characters are balanced without the insane power fantasy that cooldowns provide. Except Smash 4 Double Cloud, but honestly that's a story for another day. In Multiversus though, characters' game plans are typically balanced around the downtime of their cooldowns. Because of this factor, most tournaments outside of a few gimmick brackets ban the use of the same character on a team. Many characters' win conditions are based on whether or not they have their cooldowns available. Think about all we talked about with Bugs. Imagine if instead of having to wait until Bugs safe was on cooldown to fight his team, he just always had it available. It not only provides Bugs a win condition while it's on screen, but it also provides a way for the other Bugs to stall for his own safe cooldown to come back. You can't reflect it, and as long as one of the Bugs keeps the hitbox active with Dare, they can keep a safe on screen for a majority of the match. Safe is designed to be a move that is difficult to contest, with the counterplay being to avoid the safe at all costs. Once you avoid it though, the character's weaknesses become leagues easier to exploit. Being able to almost always keep a safe out with a thin window of opportunity creates a heavily skewed risk-reward environment in favor of the double Bugs team. Now, not every duo character is this strong, that's a given. But characters who are able to take full advantage of Multiversus design choices with traditional cooldowns are usually the problematic ones. Then again, there's even characters whose non-traditional cooldowns are considered problems, like the Wonder Woman duo. Since literally every one of their special moves give armor with the exception of Aerial's side special, they can keep each other armored for practically the whole game. Down attack is also a problem in this regard because it provides armor for herself during the charge of the move, a huge hitbox around them that can be released at any time, and also gives her teammate armor for a short while after its release. These cooldowns that we've talked about work well in a vacuum and create interesting character niches that define their identity. But it's clear to see that these characters are not designed with the idea that two of them can be on the same team. Overall though, I think the cooldowns make the gameplay of Multiversus pretty unique. There's a lot of moves that make you feel like you're playing a broken character regardless of who you pick up, and that's really fun. It sells the power fantasy of a character that provides personality and a unique playstyle based around their cooldowns. The power level of these moves just would not have been acceptable without the presence of cooldowns, and it allows developers to be even more creative when designing movesets. But also gives Player First another tool to fine-tune options that could get out of hand, regardless of your stance on cooldowns in fighting games. This mechanic allows Multiversus to stand out from its genre, and is one of the many things that makes the game just so interesting. Hey guys, thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. I am very thankful that there are people out there who are willing to give me the time of day, listen to me talk about my passions, and let me talk about all the things that I think are interesting. This video did get delayed quite a bit more than I would have liked though. Going forward, I want to make sure that I have more time for these larger projects, just to make sure that they're better researched and produced at a higher quality. So I'll most likely be moving away from the once per month video essay format. In the meantime though, I plan to put out more think pieces more often, especially in regards to other games, so be sure to subscribe and hit the like button so you won't miss any of it. And yeah, that's all I got for now. I'll see you guys in the next video.